Yellowstone is a wonderland. Old Faithful and the majority of the world's geysers are preserved here. It is an American playground that was established in 1872 as America's first national park, an idea that spread worldwide. A mountain wildland, home to grizzly bears, wolves, and herds of bison and elk, the park is a core of one of the last nearly intact natural ecosystems in the Earth's temperate zone. In 1872, when Yellowstone National Park was created, the United States was changed for the better. Providing people with an open area for natural, carefree recreation, Yellowstone revolutionized American tourism and produced many stable jobs for years to come. When President Ulysses S. Grant created Yellowstone National Park with the signing of the Act of Dedication on March 1, 1872, it was the result of three major expeditions into the region: the Folsom, Washburn, and Hayden parties. These expeditions brought the wonders of Yellowstone into public view. Prior to 1869, the Yellowstone region and its rivers, waterfalls, lakes, mountains, valleys, and geothermal features were considered an unknown and uncivilized territory. The Washburn expedition of 1870 explored the region of northwestern Wyoming that just a few years later would become Yellowstone National Park. Led by Henry Washburn, Nathaniel P. Langford, and under a U.S. Army escort led by Lieutenant Gustavus C. Doane, the expedition followed a course similar to the Cook-Folsom-Peterson expedition made the previous year, whose writings were the inspiration for this exploration. During their explorations, members of the party made detailed maps and observations of the Yellowstone region, exploring numerous lakes, climbing several mountains, and observing wildlife. The expedition visited both the upper and lower geyser basins, and after observing the regularity of eruptions of one geyser, decided to name it Old Faithful, since it would erupt about once every 74 minutes. These members experienced the beauty of the park region firsthand, and many wanted this to be set aside for all people to experience. As a result of these expeditions, many propositions were made to government representatives to try to help the Yellowstone area be protected. However, there was questions about whether it would simply be given to the state of Montana for protection or become a national park, as one Washington, D.C. newspaper wrote.
The great falls and wonderful geysers of the Upper Yellowstone, now receiving universal attention, should be forever set apart as a resort for the scientific students and pleasure seekers of the world, and for the convenience of protective legislation, they should be included within the boundaries of Montana territory. From this side, the Great Falls may be reached, and all the surrounding wonders and curiosities explored at any month of the year. As nearly the entire length of the Yellowstone River is in Montana, it is eminently right and proper that its fountains should also be. Congress should donate the extreme Upper Yellowstone with its mighty cataracts and other marvels to this territory, to be set apart and protected under appropriate legislation as a resort for pleasure and scientific investigation forever.
Finally, a piece of legislation was proposed that would establish Yellowstone as a protected national area. This was the Act of Dedication.
An act to set apart a certain tract of land lying near the headwaters of the Yellowstone River as a public park. Be it enacted by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America in Congress assembled, that the tract of land in the territories of Montana and Wyoming is hereby reserved and withdrawn from settlement, occupancy, or sale under the laws of the United States, and dedicated and set apart as a public park or pleasuring ground.
This act was approved on March 1, 1872, and it was signed by James G. Blaine, Speaker of the House, Schuyler Colfax, Vice President of the United States and President of the Senate, and Ulysses S. Grant, President of the United States. Prior to the introduction of Yellowstone in the national park system, many Americans sought pleasure in the city parks. These parks were extremely strict, such as in the example of New York City's Central Park, where citizens were not even allowed on the grass. Central Park, while revolutionary for those living in the city, was not a place for recreation. It was simply an outdoor space for carriage rides and strolling in the open air. It was a formal place, as most city parks were, and thus the introduction of Yellowstone, a different kind of park, changed people's views of park recreation. Yellowstone is one of the most popular national parks in the United States. Since the mid-1960s, at least 2 million tourists have visited the park almost every year. Yellowstone was an innovation in the American tourism industry. Prior to this, only the elite of society were able to vacation places. and oftentimes this consisted of overseas trips. However, with the establishment of the national parks, vacationing was Americanized. People were now able to take trips that were not ridiculously expensive, and America now had a tourist hotspot. As the New York Herald wrote after Yellowstone inspired the creation of several other parks.
Why should we go to Switzerland to see mountains, or to Iceland for geysers? 30 years ago, the attraction of America to the foreign mind was Niagara Falls. Now, we have attractions which diminish Niagara into an ordinary exhibition.
With the creation of Yellowstone and the beginning of tourism in the park, the government authorized building projects in which several hotels were established at attraction sites throughout the park. These also included barracks for staffers of the park and business workers. Many of these had to be rebuilt in the late 1800s because of forest fires. This was when the prominent buildings such as the Old Faithful Inn were established. The Civilian Conservation Corps, CCC, was a New Deal relief agency and played a major role between 1933 and 1942 in developing Yellowstone facilities. The CCC projects included reforestation, campground development, trail construction, and fire hazard reduction. The CCC built the majority of the early visitor centers, campgrounds, and the current system of park roads. These many building projects were ways in which jobs were created both through the construction itself and staffing of many buildings that were a part of the tourism industry. Yellowstone was one of the first examples of job creation in the American tourism industry. In order to link people to this travel destination, the railroad companies jumped at the opportunity to get in on the tourism game. The Northern Pacific Railroad was a major player in the Yellowstone tourism industry. Headquartered in Glendive, Montana, the Yellowstone Division played a major role in connecting to the northern entrance in the early 1880s, which helped to bolster attendance from 300 in 1872 to 5,000 in 1883, where it only continued to increase with the introduction of new attractions. By 1908, visitation increased enough to also attract a Union Pacific Railroad connection to West Yellowstone, though rail visitation fell off considerably by World War II and ceased around the 1960s. At this point in time, much of the railroad line was converted to nature trails, among them the Yellowstone Branch Line Trail. When the Northern Pacific Railroad and the National Hotel opened at Mammoth Hot Springs in 1883, tourism was truly allowed to spring forth. George Wakefield and Charles Hoffman began a stagecoach touring business throughout the park. Within a few years, stagecoach touring had evolved into an efficient system. Beginning in 1885, the stagecoaches were ordered specially from the plant in New Hampshire, with seats all facing forward for sightseeing, rather than inward to promote conversation. Such coaches became known as Yellowstone wagons, and two varieties graced the park scene. Large, 36-passenger coaches met passengers at the railroad depot and conveyed them up the steep climb to Mammoth Hot Springs behind 6 matched horses. For the 5-day trip around the park, 11 passenger rigs pulled by 4 horses were used. At the height of the carriage trade era, more than 100 of these stagecoaches were on the road on any given day of the 3-month summer season. Political issues had eventually forced Wakefield and Hoffman to sell out to the Yellowstone Park Transportation Company. The coaches of their Great Yellow Fleet continued service through the summer of 1916, but that summer buses were permitted to try out the road from the park's east entrance to Lake Village, which was unused by stagecoaches. Sturdy open-air buses from the White Motor Company of Cleveland, Ohio, were purchased for the route, and they proved their worth as they easily made the trip in a day that summer season. That fall, the new National Park Service held a meeting in Washington, D.C., and among the many changes they announced for the summer of 1917 was the retirement of stagecoaches from the park's roads. In 1872, when Yellowstone National Park was created, there was no legal protection for wildlife, American tourism did not exist, and the people craved for an open area for carefree recreation. In one sweeping motion, Yellowstone rectified all these issues and became the first national park. Yellowstone and the advent of the national park system revolutionized American tourism and perpetually adds to our identity as Americans today.